Homeopathy can best be described in quantum terms, and its effectiveness is profound. I only recently began experimenting with homeopathic remedies and was so impressed that I felt the time was right and the place was right to do an interview with a well-known homeopath in England, Henrietta. Part of the motivation is also that autumn is upon us, and this is when the establishment begins urging us all to get a vaccine for the seasonal flu. Henrietta says flu can easily be handled with homeopathic remedies, and wrote a book a few years back addressing this called Bird Flu, Are You Prepared?, though it covers all types of flu. But let's go into Hahnemann and why that is so in potentization.
Hahnemann was born in 1755, and he was a very clever man. He was a linguist and a doctor, and much respected in the allopathic field. But he got very, very, very disheartened and stopped practicing, gave up, because he found all the treatments were so grotesque and ghastly and mostly killed people, literally. So he ended up, he had hundreds of children, well, not hundreds, but at least 10, I think. And he ended up translating medical texts. And because he was a good doctor, he commented on these and so on, and everybody, all the doctors respected what his observations were. And he noticed that the only drugs that actually worked were the ones which, in their crude poisonings, were similar to the symptoms they were designed to cure. And the more he researched and the more he translated, the more he saw that this was the case. So he thought, well, why not we test these drugs out on people and see what symptoms they produce, all sorts of things, different minerals, different plants, different everything, see what pictures of symptoms they produce, and then use those when we meet with those symptoms in a sick person. And he did this. He must have had some very loyal friends who put up with all these symptoms, because they're pretty grim, some of them really.
Hopefully none died.
And some of them did, I think. And he realised it worked. So he got frightfully excited, went back into medical practice and was doing homeopathy all the time. But he had a problem, because when you give a poison to somebody, as we all know from conventional medicine, it can be very unpleasant and produce some very nasty symptoms. So he diluted them a bit and tried to give the maximum amount, or at least the least amount that actually worked. Mm-hmm. But at that stage it was still immeasurable in terms of conventional opinion.
Yes, and potentially toxic then.
And anyway, he was carrying on doing that, and one day two or three of his remedies fell out of his medical bag when he was travelling in his carriage somewhere, and had a thorough good shaking rolling around the carriage floor. Thought no more about it, put them back in the bag at the end of the journey and carried on working. And then he noticed that those few remedies worked 1,000,000 times better than all the others.
Because they'd been shaken up.
And he thought, what is going on here? He was completely puzzled, but being sort of enterprising, inquisitive sort of person, he then started diluting remedies and shaking them up to see whether it happened to the others or other remedies, or whether it's just a one-off. And sure enough, it applied to all his remedies. So he then started diluting and shaking them, what he called succussing them, in a very meticulous way. The scales were very carefully thought out, and providing you succuss or shake the remedy at every stage of the dilution, they become more effective, more potent. And if you don't do that, they just become more diluted and more ineffective. And it's absolutely brilliant. It's an absolute fact that the higher potencies of homeopathy are the things that do the really incredible cures. I mean, sometimes you only need a low potency, but if they weren't potentized, if they weren't energized in this way, they would be inefficient and not very good. But the minute you potentize them with this succussion, they work very, very strongly. It's absolutely fantastic.
You'll want to see this entire conversation if you've been curious about homeopathy but haven't yet given it a try. Go to ConsciousMediaNetwork.com for the full-length version.